Awesome. Well, I first want to just say thank you to everyone for being here. I think this has been a project that's been cooking in my head for, I think, literally 4 or 5 years, but it came together in a very short period of time, and I want to thank my marketing team for pulling that together. I think the quality and the speed that this came together is truly, truly remarkable, and I think we couldn't ask for a better group of people to kind of talk about the future and the current state of monetization. I think I got a lot of comments like last night about like the venue's great, the people are great. I think the ideas encapsulated in monetization and kind of why we decided to pull everyone together is that monetization, like a lot of people think of us and Metronome as like billing, and they talk about billing, or they talk about pricing, or they talk about packaging, or they talk about how to communicate value. But when we think about monetization at Metronome and kind of generally, we think monetization is the system that helps like create value in your product, and how do you transmit that value, convince customers of that value, how do you deliver it to them, and then how do you make them a happy customer so they keep coming back. And the idea of monetization is it's a whole system. It involves people in pricing. It involves salespeople, marketing folks, product and engineering folks. It's like an entire business thing. And so we wanted to gather a group of people who kind of understand that that's actually our goal. Like as a business, literally what defines a business is how well you monetize the thing that you go and build. And so a big part of this first conference is kind of kicking off with that idea, talking about the idea of monetization, kind of elevating it beyond just pricing, and packaging. And so our goal with this, as James said, is to gather folks who kind of understand that idea intuitively, get them in the same room, and start talking about the challenges, the good, the bad of trying to do the system-wide change. And I want to start by like talking a little bit about kind of how this conference came to be, because I do think it's pretty important to kind of acknowledge that because monetization is a whole system problem, it's actually really hard to say who in an organization cares about monetization. You know, you could say pricing cares about it, finance cares about it. It's actually easier to say who doesn't care about monetization inside of a business. And the answer is like almost no one. And as you know, if you work at a large company, a problem that is owned by everyone is actually owned by no one. And that's like a fundamentally impossible, like Gordian knot to cut. And so what we've realized, as I've spent a lot of time in the Valley, is that actually a lot of the people in this room have kind of taught me that there are a set of people who kind of think about monetization in a systemic way. They think about it from, how does my product like show up on a marketing page? How does a seller communicate value? How does the product actually realize that value? And then how does the product kind of earn that value day after day after day after day? And that number of people is honestly, it's like numbered in like the hundreds, and it's like most of them are in this room right now. And I think that the thing that I would just say to all of you is that I think you are correct. Your view of the world is actually the correct view. Now, most of Silicon Valley doesn't think of it that way, but that's just because I think you all are in a unique position to kind of see the future a couple years ahead of where things are going. And what we wanted to do is gather that set of people together and start to exchange best practices around how do you actually do this monetization thing the right way, because I actually do think there are right and wrong ways of doing it. And then the other thing that I would just say about like why we're here and gathered together is that you are lonely. Like, I can tell you this. I can tell you this. Like, James said it just now, but I've heard it so many times, which is like, whoa, like I'm coming to someone and I'm like a vendor and I'm trying to sell them something, of course, but I'm also just trying to connect with them. And they're like, wow, you're like the only person I've talked to who actually thinks about this the same way. And it's not that I have some unique insight. Actually, I don't. I've just listened to all of you. You have taught me the right way to think about these things. And what I realize is that independent people in different parts of the valley are kind of understanding this problem from slightly different ways. And I have the benefit, the job of spending time with all of you and kind of pulling it together. And then I realized, actually, what if we just pulled them together themselves and like actually created that network? And that would actually help solve some of this problem, which is that like you aren't lonely, you're actually not crazy. You know, even if the CEO doesn't understand what you're trying to do, you are correct. And actually the people around you understand that too. And actually what you need to do, or what is a big goal for us here, is to help you connect to each other and help to understand each other. I think probably half the people in this room have gotten a random email from me at 2 a.m., which is like, yo, Justin, would you mind talking to Sam? He's dealing with a problem that I think you've dealt with at GitLab. And that kind of thing, that's like my job, but I actually want you all to have that network and that community, because without that community, it's going to be really lonely, it's going to be really hard. And what we're trying to do is create this idea of monetization that's going to take all of us and many more besides in order to make that true. And again, I think we're all right. We are correct about the way the world should work. It's just going to take a bunch of time in order to make it work that way. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about the set of people that we've gathered. So this is a very impressive set of people, minus the Metronome folks. They're okay. These are all like luminaries. I think James used that word, and I couldn't agree more. We have folks from every walk of life, every discipline: engineering, finance, pricing, product, every discipline. We have some of the best, fastest growing companies in the history of the world in this room. We also have folks who literally defined the prior generations of monetization for like all of software. And I think it's really important that you like use this time to connect with each other, because there is so much genius in this room. Again, as smart as you think I am or the Metronome is, whatever you think of it, it's just an aggregation of all the thoughts of every individual in this room. I don't pretend to have very many original thoughts. The only thing I do is help connect those thoughts together, and you all can do that yourselves. So with that, I wanted to use my keynote to talk a little bit about the moment that we find ourselves in 2025, which is dominated by AI. And regardless of how much you believe or don't believe in the hype, the spend is real, at least for now, and the long-term promise of AI is like screamingly obvious if you used any of these tools. And so I want to talk a little bit about what does winning look like in this moment, because this moment is fundamentally weird and it's moving extremely fast. And I want to talk through a little bit of what we're seeing successful companies do as they're like kind of sailing the storms of AI in 2025. So the first thing I want to just talk about is like, I have this analogy or this idea. I actually took it from Sam, so credit to Sam. But basically, that what is fundamentally happening in the world at this moment mirrors what has happened in the 90s and the 2000s. So in the 90s, software was bought and sold and like installed on racks and servers. And then, you were like, using computers like dial-up to connect to a central node and get data down and all that good stuff. And the right monetization model for that point in time was like, think of software almost like you would think like a physical asset. You buy it once, you install it, it depreciates, you buy it again some number of years later. The rise of the internet kind of created this idea of like always-on software that updates itself, software that gets better over time. And that monetization model of buying a depreciating asset didn't make any sense anymore. And so the rise of the internet, the rise of SaaS, necessitated the creation of the seats and subscription model. I think if you're in the younger side of this audience, you probably can't think of a world where seats and subscription wasn't the dominant business model. But I tell you, it hasn't always been this way. And actually, my personal opinion is that the seat subscription era was kind of a like weird temporal anomaly caused by the rise of this nascent technology, the internet. It's been a pretty dominant model for the past 20 years, but what is happening now is a similar sized wave to what happened with the internet and the rise of SaaS is hitting all of your companies right now. So Gen AI basically is working through your products and changing the fundamental value prop from the value prop of this software connects all the people in my organization with a common set of data to this software does work for me. You actually heard it last night from Tom. He's talking about actually the software is resolving tickets. That's fundamentally very different than like ticketing software. And so the value of the underlying thing that you're selling or building is changing. That necessitates a new monetization model. That's why you see the rise of outcome-based pricing, usage-based pricing. And so I think it's really important that this linkage is like the thing, the dog is AI or value change in software, and the tail is the monetization model. And right now we're in the midst of like a Cambrian explosion of new value, and therefore a Cambrian explosion in new monetization models. And so if you think of it, like actually, I kind of look back in time and like site licenses are fundamentally quite a simple monetization model, right? There's like not that many, there's a lot of variables to it, but it's actually relatively simple. Subscriptions and seats got complicated at the end. I would say like 2022 level seats and subscriptions is like quite complicated, usage-based seats, all this like crazy stuff, but it started out quite simple. But what we see right now in 2025 is an explosion of tons of different monetization models. Token-based pricing, outcome-based pricing, API calls, all of AWS primitives, all of these different consumption and subscription mixed together. It's kind of like a giant stew. And so what I find when I talk to people in this moment is it's like kind of overwhelming. There's like 1,000 options and 1,000 more coming online every year. And like, how do you navigate this? Like, how do you actually steer through the like sea of 2025, given all of the complexity, all of the new options that are coming online? And I think that's the moment that all of us face right now. I think the interesting thing that I would say is that this velocity is actually kind of measurable in abstract ways. So basically, AI is changing every product at every moment of every day. The foundation models are literally getting better every week. And what is happening is, because the value is changing so fast, actually the monetization models are changing almost as fast. So, we saw this stat basically that like the kind of fundamental business model, pricing model that startups are going to market with. When I started my business, story time. In 2010, I started a business. It was an applicant tracking system. And at the time, there was one business model. It was seats. Like there's like good, better, best, and your job was to like, is it $9.99 or $5.99 or $10.99? It was set a price level, but like no one would ever do not good, better, best. It was very, very simple era. And now, and like we never even, literally in 3 years, never even considered a different business model. Now what we see with these AI businesses, these younger businesses, is they're actually considering fundamentally different business models multiple times in the first year of life. That's anomalous in two ways. One, old startups used to never think about monetization at all. And two, you would never, like there was no choice, it was just subscription. Now what's seeing is like a historic level of iteration, so founders are smarter, they're using monetization as a weapon, but they're also changing a lot faster. And that rate of change is being mirrored at the largest companies in the world. So like, we have Sarah from OpenAI talking later. They did many, many, many major pricing updates in a year. Now, they have a huge product suite, growing larger every day, but this rate of change, like I worked at Dropbox for 7 years. We would do a major pricing update maybe once every 2 to 3 years. Like it was like this rate of change is like unheard of. And we're seeing it also in other companies that are not just like at the forefront of LLMs. Like Salesforce is making changes quite rapidly, especially relative to their size. And this like kind of, and I think if you talk to Craig, he'll tell you, actually, we wish we could make more changes. We actually wish we could move faster. And I think that's the moment that we find ourselves in. It's like this velocity to it. And then lastly, I think this is important, a little bit talking our book, but basically what we're also seeing is a historic rise of specifically usage-based, consumption-based, outcome-based pricing, which requires a fundamentally new technical architecture in order to make it work. In fact, almost the majority, or like the vast majority of new companies are kind of their assumed pricing model looks something like token-based pricing, looks something like outcome-based pricing. It's not the seat subscription anymore. And so I think that's the kind of moment that we find ourselves in. So, what are the best companies doing? So I've kind of summarized it here, and I'm going to walk through these points. So the first thing that I have observed is that broadly, I just said it, the landscape is way more complex. And so the best businesses are treating this centrally. What they're not doing is kind of like letting this complex system kind of be managed at the edge by a bunch of nodes. That does not work. It is way too slow. Second thing is that technical moats are kind of vanishingly thin in this moment. I would argue they never really existed in the first place, but in this moment, it's like impossible to argue that technical moats are a thing. And actually what the best companies are doing is they're differentiating both on the product value and the monetization time at the exact same time. Actually, Tom last night said it perfectly. He entered that business, and the first thing he did is, how do I turn monetization into a weapon? That's what every company is doing now. Third thing is, it's like a different world today. Like the level of competition in every vertical, in every niche is incredibly high. And that means that speed is the only thing that matters. And then lastly, I think a lot of the products that are being built in 2025 are kind of built on this, I call it like unstable but evolving substrate. Like you're building on alien technology that magically gets better every week. And the value of that product and technology is changing in real time. What that means is that the customer value is changing. You need to be thinking about, how am I communicating that changing value? How does my product change, but how does my monetization strategy change with it? And we're going to talk a little bit about these 4 points and what companies are doing to actually kind of embrace these things. So let's start with complexity and talking about centralization. So as you all know, if you work inside of a large organization, changing pricing is hard. It's hard because sales has to be involved, marketing has to be involved, product has to be involved, engineering has to be involved, finance has to be involved. It's a distributed kind of like agency problem that's really, really hard. And so what we see is actually the rise in our, we wrote a white paper. The way we cheekily call it is like a chief value officer. But basically what we're literally seeing inside of the best, fastest moving companies that are taking this seriously is that there's actually like a centralized authority who is authorized to make changes across sales, marketing, engineering, and finance. This idea of a pricing committee where you have like 4 co-equal people who all argue with each other and kind of can poke holes in each other's things and kind of like spend like hours or days or weeks or months like talking about nothing and getting nothing shipped, that doesn't work. Like in the age of speed, that is like the way to die. And I know you're laughing because you're probably on a pricing committee. And which, I'm sorry. But the way I think about it is the best companies, it's like you want a pricing dictator. You want someone who has their like consigliere or their like panel of advisors, but they are empowered to go make changes. They're like, yes, sales, you have a very valid point. We're doing it anyway. And I think that's the kind of thing. And like, the best companies actually what they're doing is they're actually just the CEO is embracing this, or the avatar of the CEO is like, look, I'm just going to cut through red tape. And the reason why they're doing this is because they don't really have a choice. You cannot move slow. If you move slow, you lose market share, especially in this moment. I think the other thing that we would just say is that broadly, monetization is super complex. It's like impossibly complex. Making a good decision across all those things, the correct decision, is impossible. So you actually do need like CEO armor in order to do it because you're gonna make a change. It's gonna be like slightly bad for sales or really bad for product. And you need someone who can be like, yes, and there's no way to make a perfect change. Trying to find perfection in monetization is a fool's errand. It is much more about moving fast and iteratively improving things. And you really do need the entire organizational buy-in in order for this to work. If you don't have it, then you're just gonna, part of the reason why you all are here and feel lonely is because you probably don't have this today, but what we are seeing is like CEOs are starting to wake up to the need of this. Second thing that we see is monetization should be treated like a product. So if you're a product manager or have spent time in Silicon Valley, you probably know that 99.999% of founders, they love to think about product. They love to think about how do I create new value in the world? And they hate to think about, well, how do I actually make money on this thing? And I think that's starting to change. I think the modern founders are a little more savvy on this point. But I still think the point stands, which is that most people who join Silicon, like no one's like, I want to grow up to make a little bit more money on enterprise software. That's just not how like founders are wired. You are kind of fundamentally deranged, and you're deranged because you have some grandiose vision for how the world should work. And the commercial model is kind of an enabling technology. It's kind of a thing that like lets you keep going, but it's not the raison d'etre. And what I think we're seeing is actually, if you all are here, so you all believe this equation, but like I very much believe that great products are Google search plus AdWords. That is an amazing business. And the second half of that equation, in my opinion, is actually more important than the first. No founder would ever admit that, but it is just true in almost all cases. But what we're starting to realize is that so basically my point would be you gotta treat that second part with the same care craft that you treat the first part. And what we see is actually, again, I think the newer generation of founders is starting to get this, and you all understand this, but we're actually seeing a fundamental different way of interacting with monetization at the product level and treating monetization almost like a product that you're shipping. So, we drew these lessons from like kind of basic product management, but I think they apply, which is the best monetization teams, monetization leaders, they deeply understand their customer and their needs. The reason why this matters is because actually every product decision is a monetization decision. Every monetization decision is a product decision. Think about AWS or think about like a usage-based product. And this like theoretical API you can spin up and it like resolves tickets. In that world, the product is like this AI that's answering tickets for you. But If that agent goes rogue and just like starts doing a lot more work, at the end of the day, you're going to get surprised with a bill. And so what the best businesses do is they understand that actually the commercial model of this like unbounded spend on agents is best matched with a product feature like rate limiting or spend controls or things like that. And actually the best way to think about this is that in order to design the monetization model for a usage-based or consumption-based business, you deeply need to understand the needs of the customer, how they're going to use your product. You can't design pricing in a vacuum, X the product, and changes in the pricing model need to also be reflected in the product. I think that pairing is like really, really critical. And if you don't center the customer in designing that pairing, you're just not going to make it work. Second thing we see is a level of experimentation and freedom to experiment that is really hard to overstate. Again, I cited that fact about startups like shifting their entire business model, but what we literally see is startups doing tons of experiments like every single day. Like this new enterprise contract in, let's try an in arrears version of this. Let's try to like do some kind of usage cap thing. And they're constantly tweaking and tuning their pricing and packaging every single day. They're not looking at it like a thing that you set once and then forget about. You're looking at it as a thing you're constantly evaluating. And that's exactly how you build your product. Like you would never build a product and put it into market, especially in this era, and be like, cool, let's just sit for 18 months and we'll do an update in 18 months. That's the recipe for a dead business. If you treat monetization that way, that's a recipe for a dead business. And I think it's like those two things have to be thought of as like pairs to each other. And then lastly, I mean, Tom put it better than I ever could, but like differentiation can become in the form of product, it can come in the form of distribution, it can also come in the form of business model. And I was just listening to a podcast with Brett Taylor, and it was nominally about agents. He spent 90% of the podcast talking about how his actual differentiation is his freaking business model. As like fascinating, right? He's like building magic ticket agents, and the only thing he's talking about is commercials. And I'm like, yes, that's correct. Actually, the best form of differentiation, the hardest thing to change is commercial model. And so actually using pricing as a differentiator is a much more durable advantage. Okay, third, everything is changing. So what has to happen? You got to change really, really fast. And I think this is kind of an adage in Silicon Valley, a truism, which is the only durable advantage is speed. But you saw it last night. Like, Tom was on at the fireside, like that business is growing ridiculously fast in a very short period of time, and they're in super early innings. I guarantee you their growth loops, their monetization loops are super immature relative to where they will be in a year. And I think that, you know, Salesforce is another example. There's just like a ton of experimentation, a ton of change in that business, even though that business is one of the largest companies on earth. And I think it's really important to understand that like everything is changing incredibly, incredibly fast. Now, I think a lot of people ask me, well, like, okay, cool, like speed is like important, but like, we're just not that fast. How do you get faster? And so the way that I think about it is the first thing is like your goal. So if you think of like you're an ultra marathon runner, you run 100 miles. You know, you run 100 miles in one day and you like your body's destroyed, and then you have to wait, like it takes like 30 days to recover, and then you run another ultra marathon unless you're a freak. And, you know, like if your goal is to run as many ultra marathons as you can, you're kind of hard capped at 12 or whatever. But if your goal is to run 100 miles a week, actually you can do it. You just can't do it in 100-mile chunks. You got to do it chunked up over like a couple miles every day. And in fact, that's how I think about pricing and packaging. If you internally think that the only way to do a pricing change is some big bang thing that takes 6 months to schedule, then guess what? You're going to build a system that makes it really hard to make changes. If instead you think of it as like a continuous iterative thing, then you actually build the muscle to make it so. And that means that like if today you're on like a 12-month cycle, it's like, cool, what could you do to make it an 11-month cycle or a 10-month cycle or a 3-quarter cycle or whatever it is? The goal is not to go from 10 months or 12 months to 1 week. That's not possible. But it is possible to slowly shave it down and build in that muscle. That goes to the second point though, which is that it's only possible to move fast if more things are automated. A lot of companies, what they'll do is like, let's do a pricing experiment, and the way we're gonna back that pricing experiment is we're gonna have a manual process that basically manually calculates an invoice or does some crazy stuff. The problem is that does not scale, and you're probably an at-scale business. And so what we actually see is companies leaning the exact opposite way. Every manual process needs to be stamped out. It needs to become an automated process. Now, fortunately, Metronome exists. We can help you with this. But even if you're on an internal build or another tool, what you can do is you can kind of identify the problems by looking at anything that's manual, that's bad. And actually, the nice thing about this is almost every IT manager's dream, which is just like get rid of all the manual processes. I would just say that embracing that mindset and kind of looking at manual processes as like a bug or a code smell is a really effective way to identify where the problems are. The third thing, and I think this is really, really important, is that the data inside, like basically to move fast, your job is not to move fast. Like you don't want to like change prices and then change prices and then change prices and change prices and not look at the results. Your job is to learn. Your job is to do a price change, learn from it, take the learnings, apply it to the next one, the next one, and the next one. In order to learn, you need a feedback loop. In order for a feedback loop, you need data. And so the right way that companies think about this is they create a centralized source of truth for like basically their monetization. And then they provide that source of truth to all the teams in their company. So sales has access to this so that they can negotiate an upsell or a renewal. Customer support needs it so they can handle a bill dispute. And what it is like almost like, you know, if you like the best companies, what they're doing is they have this central golden source of truth that then everything is hydrated off of. And that's really, really hard to do, but it's super important because if you don't have that, then you have a fragmented source of truth. Finance is making strategic decisions off different data than sales, different data than customer support, and the customers are like disputing bills left and right because finance is issuing them an incorrect invoice through no fault of their own. And so what we see is actually if you don't treat it like a data problem, you won't solve the problem. Cool, last point. As a usage billing vendor, I hate to say it, but customers hate consumption billing. They hate it for a very simple reason, is that everyone hates change. And there's a reason why like 99% of companies have like a cultural value of growth mindset. It's because growth mindset is unnatural. Very few people actually like change. Now maybe you're in this room and you're like, I like change. And it's like, good, great, that's why you're here. But the whole point is that most people don't, and consumers hate it. And consumption pricing is fundamentally about change, about variability. You know, the more you use a product, the more value you get from it, the more you pay. That means that like fundamentally, the like kind of usage of the product is kind of causing you to spend more. And it means that predictability is fundamentally very hard to achieve. And so the way that we think about it is asking yourselves like how, like we kind of think about these three principles. Is your monetization predictable? Can customers kind of successfully predict where things are going? Is it visible? Do customers know what they're getting from it? Can they clearly say, the more I use this product, here's the visible value I get from it? So like a good example of this is, you know, there's a lot of these like token-based, like AI startups that essentially monetize on tokens. There are some of them where it's like every month, it's like a power bill. It's like, you consume 2.275 trillion tokens. It's like, okay, cool. Like I have no idea what to do, and I'm charging $1 million for that. It's like, thank you, I guess. Like I kind of trust that this is true, but this is so decoupled from the value that I get that it's like really hard to say, is this like a visible metric? Is the value tangible to me? And I think the better companies, what they're doing is they're kind of saying, yes, we monetize on tokens. Token shows up like value in this way for you. Maybe it's through workflows or actions or, you know, resolved whatever tickets. But the point is they invest a lot in communicating value. The visibility part of this is about communicating value to the end customer and doing it in a reasonable time frame. Like surprising people with a bill at the end of the month, that doesn't cut it anymore. Actually, especially with the rise of agents, you need more or less continuous access to this data in order to like feel comfortable with it. And then the ultimate value that we think about when you're thinking about monetization is how controllable is it? There's a billion different ways of making value controllable. You can do rate limiting. You can do spend controls. You can do EDP-like things so that you're basically committing to a bunch of spend up front and you like literally can't spend more than that. Like I think controllable has a lot of different ways, and I actually think this is an area where we're gonna, like in the product space, we're gonna explore it a lot more in the coming years as we start to like get our hands around AI agents and stuff. But I think it's really important. What we found is that if consumers can control the spend, they're actually quite okay with consumption. In fact, they start to demand it. Because what you're really doing is you're building a kind of clear understanding of, here's my product, here's the value I'm getting from it, and then here's the amount of money I'm paying for that value. If you lead with value, you convince them that they are getting more and more and more value from your product, actually they're totally happy to give you more money. Like if they're getting more value, as long as the value is greater than the amount of money that they spend, actually consumption pricing works really well. Where we see a lot of people fall down is they just fail to adequately communicate the value back to people. All right, cool. And then AWS to me, like a good example of visible, predictable, controllable pricing. AWS has like a dozens person team that works on their cost explorer. If you've ever used it, it's pretty bad, but it's very powerful. It's like the design is off. Sorry if anyone from AWS is here, but the design is terrible, but it does its job. It's like extremely configurable. And they also give you predictability tools and control tools, things like EDPs. They give you budget alerts. I actually wake up every week and I get like a spend tracker email from them. And I think this is like a good example of building a product around the monetization model. If I'm not getting a drip campaign of the value we're getting from AWS, and then at the end of the month, I'm like, oh my God, what is this $2 million bill? Like, that's not a good situation for AWS, and they know that. So they're very proactive. They reach out when spikes happen. And I think that's the kind of thing of like building a product around the monetization model. Without that stuff, their monetization model would fall apart. Cool, okay. Just as a quick summary. I think what we're seeing in the market, winning companies are centralizing monetization. That doesn't mean that there literally is a pricing dictator, but there is one person who has the like armor of the CEO to go make changes. Or you like have a very empowered pricing council. Second, treat your product or treat monetization like your product. Iterate on it. Learn from your customers. Be obsessive over the details and the craft. And make your product managers do that too. It is not just a single person. It's not like you're not going and perfecting the pricing levels. That's not what I'm talking about. You're building a product that supports your monetization, and you are iterating on it constantly. The value of your product is changing every day. Your monetization is theoretically changing every day. And I think that's a really important lesson to take home. Speed is the only thing that matters here. Like, I could not tell you what the right pricing model is for any business, because what I can say is like the 6-month pricing study that you then go launch and then you go deploy and monitor for 12 months, that's not gonna work that well in this moment. Things are changing way too fast, and you need to like build up muscle to move fast. It's like, I just watched the F1 movie, and it's like move fast or move slow to move fast. That to me is the idea here, which is that it's like about practicing the movements many times, and then you will get fast over time. Don't try to run a sprint in like without training. And then the last thing is, when you're thinking about product, when you're thinking about monetization, how do you make it predictable? How do you make it visible? How do you give customers control? If you do those things, consumption models, outcome models, they really work. Actually, Tom said it great last night. Outcomes require trust, because you and I have to agree that this outcome is worth some amount of actual dollars. Like, if you and I can't agree, if we can't trust each other, then how can we possibly exchange money on that thing? And if you don't make it visible, predictable, controllable, then customers won't build up trust, and you won't be able to like get the money that you're deserved. All right, and with that, I will leave you. Like, the one thing that I believe in this moment is everything is changing every minute of every day. And we all need to be training for that sprint. I think if you take away one thing, is like, how do you build agility in monetization, in pricing, in packaging? The more you can do that, the better you'll be to succeed in this age of AI, because AI is changing every minute of every day. And with that, I say thank you.